What's up everyone? Clark Glassford, founder of My Practice Interview, where we help you land your dream job. And today we're talking interview questions, the types of questions you could be asked and how to respond to each type of question, no matter what type of interview you find yourself in. And what do I mean by type of interview? Well, interviews are all over the map. Depending on the hiring manager or recruiter, you could have an extremely informal type interview where it's just this free-flowing dialogue. Interviewers ask you questions that come to mind, nothing scripted, nothing structured, to the complete opposite where you're meeting with a group of people. They've got scripts on the table, they've got questions that specifically they're going to be asking you, they're making notes, and they're looking for you to be bringing to the table very specific things. So you've got your informal to formal interview, and interview questions could be all over the place. Well, how do you prepare for that? Clients ask me all the time, how do I possibly prepare for an interview where I don't even know what type of interview structure I'm going to be faced with? Well, it's not as hard as you think, as long as you understand the types of interview questions that could be asked. And there are 4 types, and I'm going to get to those in a second, because it's important that you understand from the beginning, why are we asking interview questions? What's the purpose of that? Well, as a hiring manager, there's 2 purposes, and there's 2 groups of questions that I'm going to be focused on. And they're called competencies. So competencies is an HR term, really meaning skills. And the 2 types of skills or competencies that as a hiring manager I'm looking for are technical skills and then behavioral skills. So the technical skill side of things are the technical skills that you bring to the role you're applying for. So if you're a mechanic applying for a mechanic job, there are certain technical skills you need to have. Or an accountant applying for an accounting position, there are technical requirements within that role. And I'm going to ask specific questions to see if you are actually qualified to do that type of work. Then on the behavioral side, what I'm looking for are more personality-based type skills. So are you a good communicator? Do you have good interpersonal skills? Can you demonstrate initiative? So those are the behavioral skills, and typically interviews are broken into those 2 areas. So as a recruiter or hiring manager, I need to know, do you have the technical requirements for the position? And then do you have the soft skills? Do you have the behavioral, the personality that I'm looking for to fit within my team? So those are the type of skills. Now we talk about the types of questions. And there are 4 types of interview questions. First one being closed interview questions, open interview questions, scenario interview questions, and then behavioral interview questions. And I'm going to go through each of those and describe what they are and how you respond to them. So closed interview questions are just that. They are a question that provides a very limited answer, such as, do you have a degree in psychology? Yes or no. Do you have experience using Excel? Yes or no. As a trained interviewer, I stay right away from these types of questions because they don't really give me much information about you. However, not all interviews are the same, like we talked about at the beginning, and they're not all created equal. So when you're asked those closed interview questions, you need to make sure you respond by providing additional detail. Yes or no is not good enough. You need to be able to provide more detail, and we'll talk about that in the next question set here. So open questions are just that. They're open questions. They get you to talk more about the skills that I'm looking for. So describe the degree you've taken as it applies to this role. So now that gets you to talk about your degree, talk about your experience within your education, and then expand on that. So it's a more fulsome response. Tell me about your background as a mechanic. That's an open question again. So again, getting you to focus on expanding your answer, giving me a fulsome response. So the trick here is, if you're asked a closed question, respond in an open format. Never limit yourself with yes or no. The worst that can happen is an interview is going to say, I just need yes or no answers. No big deal. They will guide you if they want just yes or no answers. But for the most part, if I'm an interviewer, I want to hear more than yes or no. 9 out of 10 interviewers, they're going to want to hear more than just yes or no. So give that fulsome response. The third type of question is one we call a scenario question. So why would an interviewer ask a scenario question? Well, normally scenario questions come up when the people applying for a certain role may not have the experience that the hiring manager is looking for. So, for example, as an interviewer, I may be hiring for a junior supervisor type position, which would typically mean that the people applying for this role wouldn't have previous supervisor experience. So what I'll do is I'll build a scenario question where I'll put them in the role of a supervisor, where they're now going to talk about specifically what they would do given that scenario. So, for example, a scenario question I could give would be, you have an employee who's constantly showing up late for work. Their tardiness is getting later and later. It's causing issues amongst your team. What would you do? That's a scenario question. And you would then walk me through the steps you would take to try and resolve that situation. Now, the insider tip here is a lot of applicants start second guessing themselves and start thinking about, well, what do they want to hear? What does that hiring manager, recruiter, or hiring panel, what do they want to hear? And they start trying to formulate their response based on what they think needs to be said versus what they would actually do. Don't get into that game. Make sure you talk about what you would do based on the information you've received and walk them through the steps describing why you would make the choices you would make to resolve the situation. That will put you ahead of most of your competition for those types of questions, because they do want to hear about what you would do in that situation. And usually your judgment and decision making on dealing with a scenario like that is the right approach versus trying to think about what the hiring panel wants to hear. Okay? So last question number 4, are called behavioral questions. And they can be called behavioral questions, behavioral descriptive questions, behavioral based questions. If you're doing some research on them, those are the different terms you can look up. And what these are, and they're based on a key phrase here that really defines why these questions are asked. And it goes like this: the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So let me say that again. The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So how you handle something in the past will probably translate to how you'll handle a similar situation in the future. And as a trained interviewer, those types of questions are extremely powerful because they get you to focus on specific examples from your work experience and walk me through how you handled a specific situation. And for those of you out there who have been on interviews, you may have heard this type of question before. And they usually start with, tell me about a time when. Tell me about a time when you demonstrated initiative. Tell me about a time you had a disagreement with a difficult coworker. Tell me about a time when you solved a customer's problem with great success. So those are behavioral questions. And they're a storytelling type question that get you to really think about something you've done in the past from your work experience and then walk me through and describe that example. They're tough because we all have lots of experience. Those questions are specific on the detail and the experience they're looking for. So to think about things on the fly, it makes them hard to answer. And that's where the preparation comes in and all that type of stuff. Now, in the links at the bottom of this video, you'll see a link to our behavioral descriptive interview YouTube video, which talks specifically about prepping for these types of questions and how to answer them. Do not miss that. We broke this out into a whole separate video because it's so important that you know how to answer these questions and the way to do it. It's a great video. Don't miss it. So those are the 4 questions: closed, open, scenario, and behavioral. Really, really key that you understand those. This video is giving you some context around them. If I were to provide you an example, just let's say on leadership, and walk you through how they can change. Each question can change if I'm looking at one specific competency. So if I'm looking for leadership, how I could do that would be with a closed question would be, do you have leadership experience? Again, yes or no. Doesn't tell me much as an interviewer. I could change that to an open question. Describe your leadership experience within the various roles you've occupied. Now I'm getting you, the applicant, to open up and tell me about your various experience and walk me through all of that and give me a full background on that much more powerful question for an interviewer. I could then change it to a behavioral question, which would be, tell me about your greatest leadership accomplishment. Well, that completely changes the question, makes it much more difficult because now you're digging into your past, trying to think of an example that demonstrates your best leadership accomplishment. It's hard to do that on the fly if you haven't prepared for the role, but you can see how interviews, like I said at the beginning, can be those closed questions to an open question, then to that behavioral question, and the complexity of how you answer becomes far more challenging. So my final advice to you, make sure any question you're asked, you provide a fulsome response, and where possible, make sure you try and articulate your skills and experience in that area with a specific story. If you're asked an open question or a closed question, always put the question back to the interviewer, would you like me to give an example of where I've demonstrated this experience? Like I said before, the worst they're going to say is no, let's move on to the next question. They may say, yes, let's talk about that. Give us an example. And that now allows you to sell yourself based on specific success stories that you've had. So those are the 4 interview questions. This is an excellent video on just getting the base down for you being able to structure how you go about responding to the different questions. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. Make sure you check out the links below. Like I said, on the behavioral based interview approach, you want to look at that video for sure. Get our free ebook download, My Practice Interview. That's in the links below, as well as a link to our Interview Accelerator workshop. That workshop walks you through step by step how to prepare for any job interview, starting with creating your resume, the types of interview questions, how to answer those questions. You learn how to avoid all the different landmines and pitfalls that applicants can find themselves in, no matter what interview they're in. And at the end of the day, how to rock and ace your interview. You don't want to miss that workshop, so check that link out as well. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Give us a thumbs up, share, comment. We respond to all comments. And at the end of the day, like I always say, happy interviewing.